When I first moved to Michigan, I was so worn out. I had just graduated from the University of New Mexico, and it had felt like a 4-year emotional and mental and spiritual and relational sprint. Like every single part of me was just craving rest. I had been caving in under the pressure of work and school and clubs and friendships and relationships that I had to keep together. And every moment of my time was accounted for every single day. And it felt like everyone in my life wanted more from me than I could give. By May that year, I just got to the point where I wrote in my prayer journal, God, I just want a year to myself, to be alone. I don't want any close friends, no job that follows me home. I just want to go to work and come home. That's it. That was my prayer. And honestly, as I moved up here and settled into life here in Michigan that June, and as my initial plans failed and I spent more and more time alone, it kind of felt like God was answering my prayer. I worked at the Ann Arbor District Library, which is a dream job if you're looking for one, and as a waitress at a restaurant downtown Ann Arbor, and I attended community group and served at church, and aside from that, I pretty much kept to myself. I didn't see people from church outside of church. I didn't have deep relationships from work, and I didn't really try to form any. And here's the thing. Honestly, I've kind of never been healthier. I had my routines down perfectly. I never deviated from my quiet time with God. I never failed to feed my rabbit on time. I actually hit all of my sleep goals. I wrote a lot and stuff that I'm really proud of. I spent time working on my mental health and got more than enough exercise every day and actually cooked my meals from scratch. But every day, as healthy as I was and as good as my rhythms were, I ended my evenings feeling lost and alone. Focusing more on myself was probably a needed correction from my life in New Mexico, but I had overcorrected. I focused so much on myself that I lost track of my purpose. I was working on my mental health more than ever before, and yet I was more depressed than ever before. And anytime I had to leave my house to show up at anything, especially community group in the evenings, my anxiety would just try to keep me home, to keep me away from the one space where I had the real opportunity to form those deeper relationships. And when I look back on my prayer journal entries from my time in Ann Arbor, I noticed something interesting. Even though I was in God's Word and praying and serving, most of my prayers were about me. It reminds me of the passage we talked about last week. Last Sunday, we read this story that Jesus told in Luke chapter 12. Where Jesus tells a story and he says, the ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. So he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I will do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and then there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? The reason I'm revisiting this story is that my prayers looked a lot like this guy's thoughts. This is what I'll do. I'll say to myself. Like his thoughts are just spiraling around himself. That is what happens when we step out of community. That is what happens when we shut ourselves off from other people. And we see that God doesn't come to this man at the end of his life and say, you fool, what was this all for? No, he comes to him and he says, you fool, who was this all for? Who was this all for? Because a life lived for ourselves is empty. We've been journeying through this series for a few weeks now titled The Game of Life, really talking about what does it mean to win at life. And the thing is, you only know what winning a game means by looking at it with the end in mind, by looking at where you want to end up. In life, we can get distracted by so many different things. And in the midst of it all, we can feel like we're winning, like we're building bigger barns and we're doing more and we're living healthier lives until we get to the end. And we realize that we've been pursuing the wrong thing all along. So this series, we want to save ourselves the frustration of waking up one day and realizing we've been pursuing the wrong goal all along by talking about some of the biggest distractions and false pursuits that we can fall into. Today, I'm talking about winning alone. That's what we saw in that parable from Jesus, right? This guy in the story had everything he wanted. He was winning the game he thought he was playing, but he was winning alone. And in the end, at the end of his life, winning alone means losing. When I first moved here, I felt like things were going well. Even in the midst of my depression and anxiety, I was doing the things I wanted to do. And I was achieving what I wanted to achieve, but I was winning alone. And in the end, it felt meaningless. At the end of the day, it felt lonely. And at the end of the day, it felt like losing. And this isn't just me and this guy from a story that Jesus told. Harvard published a study in May showing that 1 in 5 Americans struggles with deep feelings of loneliness, feelings of disconnection from friends and family and the world. And it doesn't stop there, because those who report loneliness are far more likely to report anxiety, depression, lack of meaning and purpose, and a sense that their purpose, their place in this world was not important. When I say far more likely, I mean like 75% more likely to report all of those things. We were created for relationships. We were created to be with each other and live for each other. Not once a week at community group or on Sunday mornings, but in our daily lives. It's so easy to show up in all of our spaces and have people that we can laugh with or work with or study with and even pray with for a moment, but not have people who know us. It's so easy to keep walls up between us and others. We can be doing all the right things without allowing real relationships to form. We can show up and yet not have love. That's why in what has become known as the love chapter of the Bible, Paul talks about the difference between being loving and doing all the right things. He writes, "If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but I do not have love, I gain nothing." Now, to be clear, while this passage is often used for weddings, Paul is definitely not just talking about romantic love here. He uses the word agape, a type of selfless, sacrificial love that is most often used to talk about God's love for us and our love for the world. And agape love, selfless, sacrificial love, is exactly the opposite of the story we read at the beginning of this message, right? That story from the book of Luke. It's the opposite of the me mentality of storing up wealth and accumulating success for ourselves. But this agape love, it's also personal. When I first moved here and I was in community group and serving early on, I was trying to love with selfless agape love without letting it get personal. I wanted to show up in all of those spaces, but still keep people at an arm's distance. And Paul says that is worthless. If you give literally everything away, but it's not personal, you're just doing it to boast or to fill that space in your heart that it can't fill. Even when it comes to good works and good deeds, winning alone without loving relationships means losing. Have you ever gotten distracted during a game and just lost track of what you actually had to do to win? I make this mistake all the time in my favorite game, Dutch Blitz, which is a speed-based card game where your only goal is to play the 10 cards in what is called your wood pile. The problem is there are like 4 or 5 other piles that you can play cards from. And now I love Dutch Blitz and I'm really fast at playing cards, but whenever I lose, it's because I've forgotten to play the cards from the only pile that matters. I get so excited playing all the cards from all the other piles that I lose track of the main goal of the whole thing. I lose track of the only cards that actually matter, the ones that can win the game. I think we do this all the time in life. There are a lot of reasons we lose sight of what winning really looks like. I think some of us have simply lost track of it in the busyness of it all. We filled our lives so full of other things, work or kids' activities or school or volunteering or even serving here at Grace, that we no longer have time for the loving relationships that we were created for. We make that classic Dutch Blitz mistake. We're playing from all of our other piles and we forget about the part that matters. Others of us, maybe we know that there's an end in sight for our time here. We're only here for 2 years or 4 or maybe even just 6 months, and we're not going to be here forever, so it's easier just to not get attached. We just do what we're here to do, whether that's work or school or whatever, and we go home, and we go to school, and we go home, and we never get invested. Still, others of us used to have really strong community, but then life changed. Maybe you had kids, or you graduated them, or your community fell apart and you were too tired to start over. Or maybe you just simply drifted away from the people who used to be important to you. I think I kind of fit into all 3 of these camps in different ways when I first moved to Michigan. But what changed for me was seeing the agape love of Christ lived out by others here at Grace. I started out going to community groups and serving, but trying to stay independent. But then I saw how my community group members would reach out to one another and to me. I saw them offering rides and being a committed community to one another. And after a while, it stirred my heart to want the same thing. Or I saw people who I served alongside do things together, like inviting other people to do laundry with them on a Saturday, or go grocery shopping together. And I realized like something stirred in my heart, longing for that type of community. And I started saying yes to opportunities to show up, not just to show up like to a weekly commitment or fulfill my responsibilities, but really bring myself and step into spaces that weren't always comfortable. So what can we do this week to begin living into the loving relationships that God has created us for? Well, to answer this question, I actually want to talk to 3 distinct groups of people that are here today. First, I want to talk to those of you who are here today watching this online sermon and you're planning to be in Michigan for at least a few more weeks and you're not in a community group. If you're not in a community group, even if you've tried it before and it hasn't worked out, I want to challenge you to let that be your next step this week. Sometimes the first step into a life full of meaningful agape love relationships is as simple as joining a community group or a service team, a community of other believers who can know and encourage and love us. Not because that's something we should do or part of our spiritual checklist, but because we are designed to do life together. There's a connection card available on our website and in our app, and it only takes a moment to fill out. All we need is your name and a way to contact you and a check on the box that says, help me get connected to a community group. Now, obviously, if you've ever been new to a city or a country or even a church, you know that we can't just make friendships happen. And if you've ever been in my shoes, showing up week after week and still feeling alone, you know that we can't make relationships appear out of nothing. And I know that. But we can take the first step. And we can keep showing up, finding the sorts of people who can show us what agape love really looks like. The second group of people I want to talk to are those who are in a community group, but who still feel that disconnect from the most important relationships in their lives because they're so busy. Many of you are where I was that first year in Michigan. You're doing all the right things. You're showing up to a community group and you're serving either here or at school or with your work. You or your family are involved in dozens of clubs and activities that are all really good things. And yet, at the end of the day, you don't feel like you're winning when it comes to relationships, to people who really know you. The kinds of relationships that really matter, the sorts of relationships that pull you toward Christ or toward the person you want to be. Maybe your next step looks as simple and as complicated as making space, doing less. Parents, this could mean prioritizing family rituals over other things like your work or even your kids' sports and clubs. For others of us, this could look like making space for conversations and connections within our schedules, reaching out to people we want to be close with, to invite them deeper. Still, others of us need to make space to help others or even to accept help ourselves, because that requires vulnerability and trust to be able to step into those relationships, whether it's checking in on others' needs or sharing authentically about our own. So how will you set aside time and space this year to allow selfless, agape love to transform your life? I promise you that it will change everything. For me, the journey into true community that is full of love started with also allowing myself to be imperfect. Once I saw what I wanted in the community I was in, I had to let go of some of the things I had placed so much value on. I let up the reins on my bedtime so that I could stay up late after community group to talk to others. I had to let go of my pride and actually accept help when I needed it, which was often. I didn't get as much done toward my grad school application in order to make time to get together one-on-one with other ladies in my community group. There's so many amazing people here at Grace Ann Arbor who would love to pour out the love of Christ on you, but it takes time, and it's awkward, and sometimes it's a painful journey, one that requires sacrifice. Making space isn't natural, and sometimes it doesn't even seem to pay off right away, but it is the path to love. And Paul would tell us that love is what makes our lives worth living. I want to end by talking to a third group of people. Those of you who, like many of my first community group members, are already living into the type of relationships and love that God calls us to. You have your community of people who you love with the type of selfless, unconditional love of Christ, and you feel that so deeply in return. So how can you begin to pour that love out on others here at Grace, beyond your circle or in your neighborhoods, beyond those that you currently spend time with? How can you invite others, whether they know Christ already or not, into that love that you have experienced? Who can you invite to your community group or over to dinner this week? Christ loved each of us so much that he was willing to give up everything just to be with us. Not because it was expected or deserved, but because of his agape, sacrificial, selfless, and unending love for us. And that is what we are called to live into. We are called to love one another with that same selflessness and humility, not because it's expected, but because he first loved us. And when we do, we will find that our lives have meaning. That even when we lose some things, we win at what really matters. That we will get to the end of the race and hear, well done, because we are called, above and beyond everything else, to love as he loved us. So as we close today, let me pray that the love of God will fill and surround and cover over you this week. Lord God, I thank you for your agape love, your unending, selfless, undeserved love. And I thank you that you fill us, that you promise to give us that same love so that we can pour that out on the world around us. Lord, as we go from here, will you not let this be simply a message, but will you let this be a call to action, to go out from here and begin to live in relationship, making space for the messiness and sometimes the challenges of what really matters, of agape love in our lives with other people around us. I pray that you will go before us and open our eyes to the people you've already placed in our lives that we can begin to lean into relationship with or pour into with your love. And in all of this, will you be at work, bringing your kingdom, your love to this world. In your holy name, amen.